Frida Kahlo was born in 1907 in Coyoacán, Mexico, in the blue house that would one day become a shrine. From the start, she lived in tension, strength and fragility, freedom and control. Even her name carried a story. Frida most likely came from her father's German roots, Frida meaning peace, but peace would never define her. Her father, Guillermo, was a photographer. He had epilepsy, but he refused to let weakness rule him. He showed Frida how to see the world, the angle of sunlight on a wall, the shape of a shadow, the expression hidden in a face. Through him, she learned discipline, but also tenderness. Her mother, Matilda, was the opposite, strict, religious, Catholic to the core. She dragged Frida to church, forced her into rituals. Frida hated it. On the back of her first communion photo, she scribbled one word, idiota. Even as a child, she refused to bow her head. At 6 years old, her body betrayed her. Polio shrank her right leg, left it thinner, weaker. Other children mocked her. They called her peg leg. But Frida didn't break. She fought back. Her father made her swim, ride bicycles, even box. Where others saw shame, Frida found defiance. This was her first lesson. Strength and fragility are not enemies. They live side by side. Her limp made her vulnerable, but it also gave her fire. Pain was her enemy, but also her teacher. Even as a girl, she was already shaping herself into something different. Not just a daughter, not just a sick child, but a rebel. She laughed at saints, defied tradition, and carried her scars like proof of survival. From the very beginning, Frida Kahlo was more than a girl in a blue house. She was becoming a woman who turned illness into power, fragile yet unbreakable. Frida was not meant for silence. She was mischievous, restless, alive. But as a teenager, life forced her into stillness. A serious illness left her bedridden for 9 long months. 9 months of staring at ceilings. 9 months of a body that would not obey her. For most, that would mean despair. For Frida, it became training. She created a secret world inside her mind. She invented an imaginary friend who whispered to her, played with her, and kept her company when everyone else moved on with their lives. She learned something powerful. When the body collapses, the mind can still run free. Psychologists today might call this a coping mechanism, a way to handle trauma. But for Frida, it was more than survival. It was discovery. She realized her inner world was infinite. Pain pushed her inward, and inward she found strength. Where her mother prayed to saints for a miracle, Frida prayed to her own imagination, and it answered. Her father's lessons came back to her. He had taught her to notice what others overlooked, the small details, the hidden shapes. Trapped in bed, she turned that gaze inward. She began to map her dreams, her fears, her secret desires. Later in life, critics would call her a surrealist. But Frida disagreed. She said, "I never paint dreams or nightmares. I paint my own reality." That reality was being born here, in the solitude of illness. While other teenagers chased friendships and first loves, Frida learned how to transform loneliness into creation. 9 months in bed became 9 months of growth. Like a child in the womb, a new Frida was being formed. One who knew that imagination was not escape, but power. September the 17th, 1925. Frida Kahlo was just 18. She boarded a bus with her boyfriend Alejandro Gomez Arias, chatting, laughing, full of teenage energy. And then, in an instant, everything broke. A streetcar slammed into the bus, tearing it apart. A steel handrail pierced Frida's body, shattering her spine, her pelvis, her ribs, her leg. Blood spread across her clothes, but so did gold dust spilled from a passenger's bag. Witnesses said she looked like a broken doll, painted in blood and glitter. A grotesque image, almost prophetic, beauty and agony fused into one. Doctors doubted she would survive. She did, but the cost was unimaginable. Months in hospitals, years in plaster corsets. Her dream of becoming a doctor ended on that street. Instead, she became the patient, forced to study her own pain as if her body were a living textbook. Psychologists called it trauma, a sudden rupture that divides life into before and after. Many never recover. But there's another concept: post-traumatic growth. The idea that catastrophe, while breaking you, can also reveal hidden strength. For Frida, the crash didn't just mark the end of her youth, it marked the beginning of her art. Strapped to her bed, unable to move, her parents set up a mirror above her and gave her brushes. She began to paint the only subject always within reach: herself, her face, her wounds, her truth. She stared at her reflection without flinching and turned her pain into portraits. The accident destroyed her body, but it also gave her a new identity. The girl who had once wanted to heal others would now heal herself, and in doing so, heal generations who looked into her art. Frida would later write, "I am not sick, I am broken, but I am happy to be alive as long as I can paint." Frida Kahlo was never going to play by the rules of love. She had already learned her first hard lesson with Alejandro Gomez Arias, the young boyfriend who could not handle her suffering after the accident. He left. Frida understood early: never rely on a man to carry your weight. Then came Diego Rivera. He was already a giant in Mexican art, twice her age, twice divorced, heavy-set, loud and famous. To many, it looked like he was the master and she the pupil. But Frida never accepted that script. Their marriage in 1929 was not a fairy tale. It was a battlefield. Diego painted murals the size of nations. Frida painted her own reality. He betrayed her, even with her younger sister. But Frida was not the kind of woman to stay silent or broken. Frida Kahlo in Calderón, 1908 to 1964, was the younger sister of Frida Kahlo, born just 11 months apart in Coyoacán, Mexico City. The sisters were deeply connected, and Cristina often appeared in Frida's daily life and even in her paintings, such as Portrait of Cristina, My Sister. Their bond suffered a painful rupture when Cristina began an affair with Diego Rivera. For many, such betrayal would have been impossible to overcome. Yet Frida's strong mind and indomitable spirit turned heartbreak into art. In works like Memory, The Heart, she transformed her suffering into visual poetry, raw, symbolic, and powerful. Despite this wound, Frida did not allow bitterness to rule her life. She chose reconciliation. Cristina returned to her side and cared for her during Frida's years of illness, proving that their sisterly bond, though fractured, could not be destroyed. Cristina lived a quieter life, raising 2 children, but through Frida's eyes, she became immortal. She was muse, betrayer, and caretaker all at once, a mirror of the complex ties of family. She answered with lovers of her own. Men, yes, but also women. Singers, actresses, painters. She lived her bisexuality openly, in a time when society tried to bury such truths in shame. For Frida, love was not about possession. It was rebellion. Every affair was a statement. Her body belonged to her, Her desire was her own. Their marriage became legendary not because it was stable, but because it was volcanic. Passion, betrayal, reunion, fire. Diego could never cage her, and she refused to be defined by his shadow. Together they were chaos, but separately they were incomplete. Frida's love life was not weakness, it was power. She refused to hide her appetite for freedom, whether in love, sex, or art. She challenged the idea that women must be faithful, obedient, or silent. She showed that even in heartbreak, you can live unapologetically. Frida once said, "Take a lover who looks at you like you are magic." For her, magic was never about safety, it was about freedom, and she demanded it at any cost. In 1930, Frida followed Diego to the United States. For him, it was triumph, commissions to paint the walls of San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. For her, it was exile. She felt like a stranger in a land obsessed with money, machines, and power. Skyscrapers pierced the sky, but poverty lay hidden in the streets. Frida saw it all with sharp eyes. At banquets, she smiled, but in her diary she called the wealthy boring, arrogant, stupid. She hated the way they worshipped status, but she loved the chaos of the city, the clash of cultures, the raw energy. Diego was climbing scaffolds for the Rockefellers. Frida was sketching what nobody else wanted to see. Women bleeding, bodies broken, the human cost behind the glitter. In Detroit, she suffered one of her darkest moments, a miscarriage that tore her body and her heart apart. Out of that devastation came one of her most haunting works, Henry Ford Hospital. On the canvas, she painted herself naked, lying in a pool of blood, surrounded by floating images of machines, a fetus, a pelvis, a snail. It was not decoration, it was confession, it was truth. While Diego painted history on grand walls, Frida painted honesty on small canvases, and honesty lasts longer. Back in Mexico, she threw herself into politics. She joined the Communist Party, opened her home to radicals, and turned the Blue House into a sanctuary of rebellion. When Leon Trotsky fled Stalin, it was Frida and Diego who gave him shelter. For a time, she gave him her heart too. She never separated love, art, and politics. For her, all of it was resistance. Frida declared with every stroke of her brush that the personal is political. Pain was political, womanhood was political, love was political. And in all of it, she refused silence. She once said, "I paint flowers so they will not die." For her, painting was not escape, it was revolution. By the 1940s, Frida's body was collapsing piece by piece. The crash had left her with fractures that never healed. Every year brought new surgeries, new scars, new corsets of steel and plaster. She walked with a limp, swallowed painkillers, and drowned the rest with tequila. Still, she refused to disappear. Her pain became her palette. In the broken column, she painted herself split open, her spine replaced by a shattered pillar, nails piercing her flesh. In the two Fridas, she doubled herself on the canvas. One heart bleeding out, the other holding her own hand. These were not pleas for pity. They were declarations. She was saying, "Look at me, look at suffering, and see that I am still here." Psychologists might call it exposure, confronting trauma instead of hiding from it. But Frida did more than confront her pain. She transformed it. She weaponized it. Her wounds became her symbols. Her scars became her language. Where others hid weakness, she turned it into raw power. When gangrene spread through her leg, doctors amputated it. For most, it would have been the final blow. But Frida painted her prosthetic, decorated her crutches, and even joked in her diary, "Feet, what do I need you for when I have wings to fly?" Sarcasm, yes, but also defiance. Even dismantled, she refused to be erased. The Blue House became her sanctuary. Birds, monkeys, idols, flowers. She filled it with color and chaos. Too ill to travel, she turned her world inward, painting and laughing, drinking with friends, turning every day into performance. Her very life became art. Frida showed the world that vulnerability is not the opposite of strength. Vulnerability is strength. She proved that pain can be turned into creation, into resistance, into a weapon no illness could ever take away. She once said, "I paint self-portraits because I am the person I know best." And the person she knew best was both fragile and unbreakable. By the early 1950s, Frida Kahlo was living on borrowed strength. Her health was failing rapidly, but her will burned brighter than ever. Every step was agony. Every day was a fight, yet she refused to vanish quietly. In 1953, Mexico hosted her first solo exhibition. Doctors warned her not to attend. Frida ignored them. Friends carried her into the gallery on a bed, dressed in vivid colors, crowned with flowers, smiling as she greeted guests with tequila and jokes. The room erupted around her. It wasn't just an exhibition, it was a declaration. Even broken, even confined to a bed, Frida Kahlo commanded attention. She turned fragility into theater, weakness into power. But her body continued to betray her. More surgeries followed. More pain. She became dependent on painkillers and alcohol. But she kept painting. Each work more raw, more intimate, more fearless. Her diary from this time is filled with drawings of bleeding hearts, soaring birds, and desperate prayers for strength. She knew her time was short, but she lived it loudly, defiantly. On July 13, 1954, Frida Kahlo died in the Blue House of Coyoacán, the same place where she had been born. She was only 47. Her last words in her diary captured her spirit perfectly. "I hope the leaving is joyful, and I hope never to return." Her death did not silence her, it amplified her. Crowds poured into the streets for her funeral, chanting her name, carrying her image like a banner. She was no longer just Diego Rivera's wife, no longer just a painter. She was a symbol. A feminist before the word was common, a rebel who lived without apology, a woman who proved that pain could be transformed into beauty, weakness into defiance, wounds into weapons. Frida Kahlo's life did not end in 1954, her spirit only grew louder. Today, her face is everywhere, on murals, t-shirts, protest signs, altars during Dia de los Muertos. But behind the pop culture image is something deeper, a woman who lived on her own terms, no matter the cost. She was not spared from pain. She was not granted peace, yet she transformed every wound into a weapon, every betrayal into defiance, every illness into art. That is why she endures, because she showed us that fragility and strength are not opposites. They live side by side, and together they can build something unbreakable. Psychologists speak of resilience, of post-traumatic growth, of the power to rise after catastrophe. Frida Kahlo lived those theories before they had names. She embodied the paradox, broken yet whole, suffering yet radiant, vulnerable yet untouchable. She once said, "At the end of the day, we can endure much more than we think we can." Those words are not just a reflection of her life, they are a challenge to ours. So the question is this: What do you do with your pain? Do you bury it, hide it, let it weigh you down? Or do you do what Frida did? Turn it into fuel, into beauty, into something that refuses to die? Her story is not just about art. It's about survival. It's about rebellion. It's about freedom. And it's a reminder to anyone who feels broken. You are not defeated, you are becoming. Frida Kahlo's colors still burn because they are not just painted on canvas, they are painted on us. Thank you for watching. If Frida's story touched you, don't let it stop here. Share it, leave a comment, and tell me, what part of her journey resonated with you most? Her strength, her defiance, her pain, or her art? This channel isn't just about history, it's about the human stories that still echo today. So if you want more voices like Frida's to stay alive, make sure to subscribe and join the conversation.